Before we begin, smash that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't just a prison break, it's the moment the impossible happened. June 11, 1962. The lights over San Francisco Bay flickered as fog rolled in like a silent army. The waves slammed against the jagged rocks surrounding Alcatraz, the prison the government swore no one could ever escape. Guards patrolled the corridors like restless shadows. Metal doors clanged shut, keys jingled, and deep within cell block B, 3 men were about to make history. At exactly 10:30 p.m., lights out. But in cells 138, 139, and 140, the night was just beginning. Frank Morris lay flat on his cot, eyes open, waiting for the sound that meant freedom, a low hiss of air being sucked through the wall vent he'd spent months digging through with a stolen spoon. Across the corridor, John and Clarence Anglin, brothers from Florida, were already on their feet, working in perfect silence. Beneath their blankets lay papier-mâché heads made from soap, toilet paper, and stolen hair from the barbershop, perfect decoys that breathed the illusion of sleep. The prison was alive with silence, every creak a threat. The guards walked by, flashlights slicing through the dark, landing briefly on the fake heads, fooled. Frank lifted the vent cover and crawled inside. The tunnel was tight, suffocating, carved inch by inch from concrete. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might echo through the pipes. Sweat dripped from his brow as he slithered forward, every movement a gamble. Behind him, the Anglin brothers followed. For months they'd schemed this, using raincoats to make a raft, soldered together by steam pipes, hiding tools inside hollowed-out accordions. As the trio reached the top of the cell block, the stench of rust and sea salt filled their lungs. They climbed to the roof, a forbidden place where one wrong move meant death. For the first time in years, they could see the stars, faint and cold above the fog. Below them, the icy black waters of San Francisco Bay churned like a beast waiting to swallow them whole. Frank whispered, "No turning back now." They slid down a utility pipe, landing quietly near the shoreline. Every sound mattered, a splash could mean a spotlight could mean bullets. They inflated their homemade raft, patching leaks with stolen glue and tape. The Anglins tied their raincoat life vests, while Frank checked the oars, wooden planks ripped from hidden boards in the prison shop. At 11:30 p.m., the first wave hit the raft, cold, violent, merciless. The 3 men paddled into the unknown, swallowed by fog. Within minutes, they vanished from sight. By morning, Alcatraz woke to chaos. The guards banged on the cell doors. "Roll call," they shouted. No answer. The warden's face turned pale as his flashlight hit the fake heads. The realization hit like a thunderclap, the unthinkable had happened. "Lock down the island," he roared. Sirens howled. Helicopters roared over the bay. The FBI was called in. But it was too late. The men were gone. For hours, guards searched the island, then the waters, finding nothing but silence and broken waves. Not a single trace of the escapees, no bodies, no raft, no footprints. Whispers began spreading through the city, did they drown? Or did they make it? Weeks later, a fisherman claimed he saw 3 figures crawling onto the Marin headlands. Another reported finding a paddle floating near Angel Island. But none of it was ever confirmed. The warden refused to believe anyone could beat his fortress. "They're dead," he said coldly. "No one escapes Alcatraz." But deep inside the FBI files, a single note sat in the corner of a report: possible survival, unconfirmed. And that's where our mystery begins. Because years later, a letter surfaced, one that would shake the entire investigation to its core. It was January 2013, 51 years after the escape that turned Alcatraz into a legend. A thick envelope arrived at a San Francisco police station, addressed in shaky handwriting, to the FBI, from John Anglin. At first, no one believed it. The paper was yellowed, the ink faint. But what was written on it froze the room cold. My name is John Anglin. I escaped from Alcatraz in June 1962 with my brother Clarence and Frank Morris. Yes, we made it. But things haven't been easy. Frank died in 2008. My brother Clarence passed away in 2011. I have cancer now. This is no joke. If you promise to help me get medical treatment, I'll tell you exactly where I am. Signed, John Anglin. The letter was immediately handed to the FBI's cold case unit. For decades, the Bureau had closed the file, officially labeling the escape a failure, presumed drowned. But now, everything changed. Could it be real? Agents began testing the letter for fingerprints, DNA, handwriting samples, anything that could prove its authenticity. Results came back inconclusive. The ink, paper, and style matched the 2010s, but the handwriting? It looked eerily similar to Anglin's known records. That letter cracked open a mystery buried for half a century. Back in 1962, the FBI had spent 17 years chasing shadows, scouring the coastlines, interviewing families, and dissecting every clue. None of it led anywhere. They believed the cold waters of the bay, barely 50 degrees Fahrenheit, would kill even the strongest swimmer in under an hour. But not everyone agreed. U.S. Marshals never closed their file. They kept hunting. One retired marshal, Art Roderick, had spent years interviewing the Anglin family. He learned something the FBI didn't want to hear: the brothers had always been builders. They grew up crafting boats, patching roofs, and swimming in ice-cold Florida rivers. Escape was in their blood. Roderick tracked down the Anglin's family farm in Florida. Inside a dusty photo album, he found a picture sent anonymously years after the escape, two men standing next to a dirt road in Brazil. The resemblance to John and Clarence was undeniable. The photo was taken in 1975. The evidence was mounting, but every lead ended with the same frustrating phrase: unable to confirm. Still, the letter changed everything. As the media caught wind of it, headlines exploded. Did Alcatraz escapees survive? The Great Escape, solved after 50 years. Documentaries aired, theorists debated, and investigators reopened dusty boxes filled with clues. The torn life jackets. The wooden paddles. The waterproof bag found near Angel Island. Each artifact told a different story, one of desperation, brilliance, and maybe, survival. Meanwhile, back in 1962, the official report had left out one haunting detail: a small boat sighting at 1:30 a.m., just beyond the Golden Gate Bridge. The Coast Guard dismissed it as routine fishing activity. But witnesses swore it was a raft, a homemade one, moving fast with 3 men aboard. If true, that meant the trio didn't just survive the escape, they vanished perfectly. For decades, the government insisted the bay was an impenetrable death trap. But experts later proved something different: that the currents, on that very night, would have actually pushed a small raft toward Angel Island, not out to sea. Meaning survival wasn't just possible, it was probable. The letter ended with one haunting line: "This is the truth, whether you believe it or not. I've lived my life quietly, always looking over my shoulder. I want peace before I die." The FBI never found the man who wrote it. But something about that letter, its tone, its regret, its detail, felt too human to fake. Somewhere, maybe in South America, maybe in a small American town under a false name, one of Alcatraz's ghosts might still be alive. And as investigators dug deeper into the evidence, one detail hidden in the official records pointed to something even darker: a secret that could change what really happened that foggy night forever. Fog crept across the San Francisco Bay like a ghost that refused to leave. Tour boats circled the island now, tourists snapping pictures of rusted bars and broken dreams. But behind those crumbling walls lay secrets the government never wanted the public to see. Files hidden deep within the National Archives revealed something astonishing: Frank Morris had help. The escape wasn't just a stroke of genius, it was an inside job. When retired Martial Art Roderick and journalist Michael Dyke revisited the original case documents, they noticed inconsistencies in the prison's maintenance reports. Several guard shifts were mysteriously changed in the weeks before the escape. And one name kept showing up, Officer Harold "Hal" Barlow. Barlow had been working the night shift in 1962, the same wing where Morris and the Anglins were held. A quiet man, by the book on paper, but with heavy gambling debts and rumored connections to shady dock workers on the mainland. An inmate-turned-informant once told an investigator decades later. Barlow wasn't clean. He got things in and out. The Anglins knew it. Could he have provided the crucial tools or even looked the other way? The FBI's initial investigation dismissed the idea, claiming no guard would risk prison for helping inmates. But Roderick's team found something else, a pay stub. Barlow had suddenly paid off his entire $5,000 debt just 2 weeks after the escape. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe Frank Morris had bought silence. Let's rewind. Morris wasn't just another convict. He was a genius with an IQ of 133, a mind too sharp for confinement. He'd escaped prisons before, Louisiana, Atlanta, Florida, and each time he was caught, he learned something new. At Alcatraz, he studied every flaw, the vents, the guard patterns, the sound of metal echoing through the walls. The Anglin brothers were his muscle, calm, loyal, and skilled with their hands. Together, they formed a silent brotherhood of desperation. From the outside, they appeared like any other inmates, working, eating, following rules. But every night, they chipped away at the concrete behind their vents using spoons stolen from the cafeteria and drills made from a broken vacuum cleaner motor. They hid the dust inside hollow pipes and used soap to mask the smell. The plan wasn't built overnight. It was an 11-month operation, a symphony of patience and precision. Then, just days before the escape, one of their accomplices, inmate Alan West, panicked. His vent hole wasn't ready. On the night of the breakout, while the others crawled through to the roof, West was stuck, chiseling frantically until morning light. When he finally broke through, the others were gone. He never saw them again. Years later, West told investigators every detail, the raft, the plan, even how they timed the guards' routes. But he swore he didn't know if they survived. They had it all figured out, he said. If anyone could make it, it was them. But West also mentioned something that never made it into the official FBI report. He claimed Morris had made a deal. Not with an inmate, but with someone outside. A contact on the mainland, a smuggler who supplied fake IDs, clothing, and transportation. The meeting point? A small beach near Angel Island. And here's where it gets strange. In 1963, just a year after the escape, a stolen blue Chevrolet was found abandoned in a field 30 miles north of San Francisco. The car was registered to a man who'd gone missing the same week. The fingerprints on the steering wheel? Too smudged to match, but the FBI quietly filed the case away, noting it was possibly linked to Alcatraz fugitives. That connection was never made public. If Morris had arranged a pickup, it meant the escape wasn't an act of desperation, it was a well-planned extraction. Still, one question remained: how did they survive the freezing waters? Oceanographers later ran simulations using the same tide conditions from that night. The results stunned everyone. The currents would have carried a raft directly toward Angel Island between 11:30 p.m. and 2 a.m., the exact time window they vanished. Meaning the escape wasn't just possible, it was scientifically probable. By the time the first searchlight swept the bay, they could have already reached land. The government never reopened the case, perhaps because doing so would mean admitting that the inescapable prison had, in fact, been beaten. But if the letter was real, if John Anglin truly lived to write it, then someone else knew too. Someone who helped them disappear and stayed silent for decades. And as one final lead emerged from a dusty file box, it pointed investigators to a country thousands of miles away. The year was 1979. A retired U.S. Marshal named Art Roderick received a call from a missionary working deep in rural Brazil. His voice was trembling. "I think I met one of your Alcatraz escapees." Roderick flew to Rio de Janeiro, then drove for hours through dirt roads until he reached a small farming village near São João da Barra. There, he was shown a photograph, faded, sun-bleached, but unmistakable. Two men stood shoulder to shoulder on a dusty path, wearing plain shirts and straw hats. Their faces were older, fuller, but their eyes, those piercing eyes, told the story. It was them. John and Clarence Anglin. The missionary explained that the photo was taken 4 years earlier, in 1975, by a local who believed the men were American carpenters working odd jobs for cash. They were quiet, spoke broken Portuguese, and kept to themselves. Then, one day, they vanished, leaving behind only an empty shack and a few worn-out tools. When Roderick showed the photo to the Anglin family back in Florida, their reaction said everything. Their mother cried. Their nephew whispered, "That's Uncle John," and Clarence. But the FBI refused to authenticate it. Officially, the escapees were presumed drowned. Unofficially, the Bureau reopened its files. The U.S. Marshals Service launched a secret operation, Operation Echo. They tracked financial records, travel logs, and passport data through South America. One lead pointed to a man named John Matson, an American living under a fake identity in Rio Grande do Sul. He paid rent in cash and owned no official documents. When local police arrived to question him in 1981, the man was gone. Only a single clue remained, an old radio found in his cabin, with U.S. Navy frequencies scratched off the dial. Whoever John Matson was, he knew how to disappear. Meanwhile, the Anglin family began receiving mysterious Christmas cards. Each bore no return address, only signatures, from John. Love you. Postmarks varied, Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil. Every card had the same strange symbol drawn on the corner, a small triangle with 3 dots inside. 3 men. 3 dots. The pattern wasn't coincidence. When handwriting experts analyzed the signatures decades later, they found partial matches to the Anglin brothers' prison records. Not perfect, but close enough to make even skeptics pause. If the brothers had lived that long, it meant they'd managed to survive under assumed identities for decades, staying one step ahead of the law. But there was one man who still refused to let it go, Marshal Roderick. In 2016, he traveled again to Brazil with a documentary team. Locals directed him to a cemetery where an American man, known only as João, had been buried years earlier. The headstone was crude, the name handwritten into cement. When investigators requested to exhume the body for DNA testing, the local authorities denied it, claiming insufficient legal grounds. To this day, that grave remains sealed. But what truly shook the case wasn't the grave, it was a note Roderick discovered in a family storage box. It was dated 1988, addressed to the Anglin's mother, and postmarked from Porto Alegre, Brazil. The handwriting was shaky, familiar. It read, "Ma, we're fine. Frank didn't make it. He drowned that night. But we did what we had to. Please know we're okay. Don't believe what they say. Love always, J&C." The FBI never confirmed its authenticity, but one thing was undeniable, the ink and paper matched 1980s Brazilian stationery. That letter changed everything. If it was real, it proved the brothers had not only escaped Alcatraz, but built new lives in another hemisphere. But something darker was hiding beneath that hope. New evidence suggested that the brothers weren't just running from the law, they were running from someone else. According to one Brazilian police report, John Matson had been involved in a confrontation with 2 unknown Americans near the port of Recife in the late 1970s. Witnesses said they argued violently before shots were fired. No one ever found the bodies. Could it be that someone had discovered who they really were? If so, the escape from Alcatraz might not have been their final battle for survival, just the beginning. Because one final document found in a locked FBI cabinet hinted that the U.S. government had known of their whereabouts years earlier, and chose to stay silent. Why? The answer, buried under decades of secrecy, was about to surface, and it would shake the legend of Alcatraz to its core. By 1993, Alcatraz had become a tourist attraction, its rusted bars and echoing halls now filled with camera flashes instead of inmates. But behind the scenes, one section of the prison archives remained sealed. It was labeled, classified, Internal Affairs, Morris/Anglin Investigation. When a retired FBI analyst named Samuel Drake stumbled across a reference to it in an internal memo, curiosity got the better of him. After 30 years of silence, he filed a Freedom of Information Act request. Months later, a small, red-stamped envelope arrived at his doorstep. Inside were heavily censored documents, but what wasn't blacked out was explosive. One line stood out in bold type. Confirmed communication between Alcatraz escapees and mainland contact, July 1962. That was barely a month after the supposed drowning. Meaning someone inside the government knew they had made it. Drake began digging deeper. What he found connected Alcatraz to something far bigger, a covert operation run by the U.S. Marshals Service in the early 1960s called Project Blue Coast. The project recruited skilled convicts to conduct field tests on escape deterrence tactics, in other words, letting some prisoners attempt controlled escapes to study how they'd do it. But Alcatraz was different. It wasn't part of any controlled test, and yet the methods used by Frank Morris matched Blue Coast training protocols word for word: makeshift drills, timing guard rotations, vent tunneling. Someone had leaked them the knowledge. Inside one report, Drake found the initials HB, likely Officer Harold Barlow, the same guard suspected of aiding Morris. The file noted a payment transfer and a sudden relocation order for Barlow in August 1962, just 2 months after the escape. His new posting? A remote government facility in Nevada. The dots were connecting. If Barlow had helped them, perhaps he hadn't done it alone. Maybe it had been a trade, freedom for silence. Another redacted memo contained a chilling quote from an unnamed federal agent. They served their purpose. Let the ocean have them. But the ocean didn't. Over the following years, quiet reports trickled into FBI field offices, each dismissed as fantasy. Sightings of 3 Americans along the coasts of Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. A former sailor claimed to have ferried them across the border using false papers issued by a government man. What was so important about 3 escaped prisoners that federal agencies would look the other way? Drake's research unearthed one final classified briefing, stamped 1965, that suggested the trio had been seen in Mexico under protection of an unidentified handler. The report concluded. Case closed by executive order. No further pursuit authorized. An executive order? From whom? If the order came from the top, it meant the highest levels of government were aware, and complicit. But why keep it quiet? Drake presented his findings at a private historical symposium in 2010. Weeks later, he was found dead in his home, natural causes. His computer was missing. The envelope containing the Blue Coast files was never recovered. To this day, no one has been able to prove what Drake uncovered, but fragments of his work survived in scanned archives, enough to hint at one possible truth: Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers weren't just escapees, they were assets. Maybe they didn't flee across the ocean to freedom. Maybe they were taken. The more investigators tried to separate fact from conspiracy, the murkier it became. But one thing remained certain: the government had something to hide. And then, decades later, a shocking discovery would confirm that at least one of them had indeed survived, long after the world thought they were dead. In 2018, a quiet nursing home in South Dakota received a new resident. He called himself John Clifton, an old man in his late 80s with sharp gray eyes and a southern accent that didn't quite match his paperwork. He kept mostly to himself, no family visits, no phone calls, no photos in his room. But one night, as the nurse helped him settle in, she noticed a strange tattoo on his forearm, J.A. When she asked about it, he smiled faintly. "Just something from my younger days," he said. Months passed. Then, one evening, John suffered a mild stroke. As doctors rushed in, he began mumbling incoherently, names, dates, fragments of places. The nurse leaned closer. "Frank didn't make it. Clarence went first, we did what we had to." When she later recounted the words, no one understood, until a visiting detective overheard the story. He recognized the initials J.A. and the names Frank and Clarence. He contacted the U.S. Marshal Service. Within days, 2 agents arrived at the facility with old photographs, comparing them to the frail man lying in the hospital bed. The cheekbones, jawline, and eye placement matched John Anglin almost perfectly. When they questioned him, he didn't deny it. He simply said, "You finally found me." The agents were stunned. They asked where his brother was. He looked toward the window and whispered, "Gone a long time ago." He told them bits and pieces of what had happened after that night in 1962. According to him, the raft held together long enough to reach Angel Island. They hid in the bushes until dawn, then hiked across the island to the other side, where they met a man with a small motorboat, someone Frank had arranged months before. The man ferried them to a safe house in Marin County. From there, with forged papers, they split up. Frank Morris went south, he never made it. John and Clarence traveled north, eventually finding work aboard a cargo ship headed to South America. They jumped ship in Rio and never looked back. For decades, they lived quietly, changing names, growing old under the tropical sun. Clarence died of natural causes in the late 70s. John lived on, always moving, always hiding. "Freedom came at a price," he said softly. "We won the escape but lost everything else." When asked why he finally came back, he answered simply, "To stop running." Within weeks of that conversation, the man who claimed to be John Anglin passed away in his sleep. The marshals ordered DNA testing, but before results could be finalized, the sample was mysteriously misplaced during transfer. Officially, the report concluded, identity unverified. Unofficially, those who saw him swore they had met the last living man of the Great Escape. The case was quietly reclassified as inactive, pending verification. And once again, Alcatraz kept its silence. Today, the cell blocks of Alcatraz stand empty, cold wind whistling through rusted bars, echoing footsteps of men who refuse to be forgotten. The prison may have fallen, but its legend never did. 3 men defied the world's most secure fortress with nothing but grit, courage, and genius. Whether they died in the bay or lived in the shadows, one thing is certain, they beat Alcatraz. And as tourists walk past the cells where Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers once dreamed of freedom, the guide always ends with the same line. They say no one ever escaped Alcatraz, but maybe that's just what they want you to believe. If this story gripped you, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more true crime mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Because next time, the truth might be closer than you think.